Okay, so let's get started then. So good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Green. Quite happy to be here. I enjoy this conference every year. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I really think that this conference is the predominant conference for pragmatists, and I think the Kanban community in general is an essential counterbalance to everything else that's out there. So I'm thrilled to be here as always. I want to thank the conference for having us, and I want to thank all of you for investing your time and money to hear the talk. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Christina Murto. She's a Master Agile Coach at CapitalOne, and it is our sincere hope that you will find both utility and interest in what we're going to share with you today. So we're going to cover some different areas. We're going to share some of the experience of 2 years that I spent at CapitalOne from March of 15 to this past March of 2017, scaling across a fair number of teams, applying Kanban, and trying to put in place a good foundation for evolutionary change. So we'll go through some typical things that you would expect, some background objectives, what our first principles as we define them starting out, kind of some things, some guardrails that we put in place. And then we're going to go over some outcomes or some of the results that we got, and we move this up to the front of the presentation to give you more value faster as an audience so you can see some of that sooner. Great recommendation by Marie Dingus there. And then we'll back into some of the things we did with the workshop, and then some of the Kanban in action. We'll look at some boards and some metrics and so forth. And then we'll wrap it up with learnings, and we'll be kind of tag teaming this, Christina and I. So there's no rocket science in any of this. A lot of it is very basic Kanban implementation. Some of it's proto-Kanban. But as David mentioned earlier, even starting out with some proto-Kanban practices can be huge in terms of the leverage and benefit that can be gained just from doing some of the simple things. So we hope to show you some of that today. So a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for about 24 years. I spent 16 years at a company called Advanced Micro Devices. I don't know if that rings a bell with anybody, but they manufacture x86 microprocessors. So I kind of cut my teeth in lean manufacturing. First did Kanban in manufacturing in the early 90s. And we built all the control systems that governed this fabrication facility that controlled the robots and the chemical processes, and that was all sort of, kind of decision support systems to support lean manufacturing. So I've been doing this for kind of a long time and quite happy to be applying some of these in knowledge work, of course, very different manufacturing and knowledge work, but a lot of the principles can be readily applied. Have worked for a bunch of different areas. Again, of note, last couple of years spent at CapitalOne doing a lot of cool stuff there. So with that.
Hi, I'm Christina Murto, and as Eric said, I'm an Agile coach at CapitalOne, and I've spent most of my career here in Northern Virginia, about the last 20 years in IT, so some of you who are from the area might recognize a few of the companies that are mentioned here. Spent some time at the Department of the Navy, at the Pentagon as a contractor, and I spent a few years working out on my own as a consultant. So I've been at CapitalOne a little over 5 years, and as Eric mentioned, worked with him for about the last year, and one of our colleagues, Marie Dingus, on bringing Kanban and lean practices to some of our teams in our digital engineering area. So recently, our CIO, Rob Alexander, was interviewed by Forbes magazine, and they were talking to Rob about how CapitalOne had evolved to become a leading digital bank. So instead of thinking about CapitalOne just as a financial institution and a cool place to see commercials about credit cards, CapitalOne has really evolved to be focused on bringing great digital products to market. And in the last 5 years since I've been at CapitalOne, there's really been a push to change the way we work. And it's influenced everything from the engineering talent that we've hired and spent a lot of time cultivating to our workspaces. As you can see, this really cool workspace in our Richmond office that's pictured below. And we started seeing some great digital products come to market quickly. We started seeing great collaboration with our teams. We saw a lot of things that you would expect from an Agile implementation or an Agile transition. But as we got to a few years ago, maybe about 2 years ago, right before Eric came into the picture, we started looking at how could we do even better. And we started talking to our teams about what did they need, what things were not going like the way they would want them to. And one of the themes we heard was that they felt like their practices were getting stale and that they, in some cases, were not tailored to fit the needs of the team. And so we were trying to figure out, what do we do about that? And we heard that in another part of CapitalOne and another part of our engineering group, that some of the teams were not only doing all the great things about delivering great things and delivering them quickly, but they were actually excited about how they worked. Not just the products they were delivering, but how they worked together to figure out how to deliver those products. So we were like, well, what's going on over there? And one of our colleagues went over there and investigated, and what was going on was Kanban. So as we took a look at what was going on in this other area, they were looking at things at a much deeper level. They were looking at how to increase flow, how to deliver things using visualization and limiting WIP. They were gaining a deeper awareness of their delivery risk and health, looking at qualitative and quantitative measurements. They were increasing sustainability and happiness of employees. People were really excited about how they were working. And they were creating trust across their whole organization, which is just an amazing thing. So as we started talking to Eric and we started looking at what our guiding principles were, one of the things that Eric talked about a lot with us was superset thinking. And then we talked about Bruce Lee, so I was really happy because I'm a martial artist, so that brought him some trust with me. But one of the things that I just loved in this quote here about don't get set in one form, adapt it, build it as your own, let it grow, be like water. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. Now put water in a cup. It becomes the cup. You put it in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow and it can crash. Be water, my friend. This is the way that we tried to get our teams to think about all of the tools we were giving them. It wasn't about, are you doing Scrum? It wasn't about introducing a new set of checklists for them to use. It was about taking a look at all of the different things we could let them learn about and then letting them figure out for themselves which of these tools fits our purpose for our teams. So as David talked about earlier, this is a huge thing that we really emphasized with teams. Start with what you do now. Many of our teams were doing Scrum. Some were doing a kind of proto-Kanban. But whatever it was they were doing, we made sure that we understood what they were currently doing as they were doing it. And when we did it in such a way that we were not going in with a you're doing it wrong. It's what are you doing and how is it working for you? We made sure that we respected the current roles, responsibilities, and job titles, as well as the environments that they were working in. We made sure that we talked to people in the leadership areas to make sure that there was an agreement that they really wanted to change and that they were comfortable with having their teams take a look at this. And then we made sure that everybody felt empowered to have leadership at all levels. That was down to the smallest thing that the workshops that we're talking about later, we made sure that everybody on the team felt like they had a voice as the team worked together in the workshops and the exercises. Some of the practices we started out with and emphasized was getting teams to visualize their work. So many teams felt like they were already doing that because they had worked with either boards on the wall or they had worked with tools where they were putting their stories and tickets in there. But we got them to do it on a deeper level, like as we'll show you later. Making policies explicit. So many of our teams were familiar with the definition of ready and the definition of done because they had done Scrum for a long time. But really talking more deeply about their work and getting agreement and understanding among the whole group on the policies of the work. And then finally, the big thing that was new to them was limiting work in progress. They'd heard about WIP, they kind of understood it, but it still was something we really had to help everyone at the team level and at the organization level understand the impact that WIP could have on increasing the team's ability to have good throughput. And we continue to work on flow and feedback loops, and of course, improving. We spent a lot of time talking about continuous improvement and making sure that experiments were done and measured and decisions were made based on the outcome of those experiments. Small, iterative changes. The biggest guiding principle we had was making sure that we avoided resistance so that we could get momentum. So instead of crashing our heads against the rocks, we flowed around them. We used an opt-in model where we focused on teams and areas who recognized that they had interest, bandwidth, and opportunity to make changes. If somebody said, my group is underwater, we can't do this right now, then we went to somebody who did. We made sure that we provided support for change agents so that they could continue to grow and sustain the improvements, and they felt supported. And finally, we made sure that we had a broad socialization of our qualitative results so that leadership could see how Kanban had resulted in positive change for their teams in their areas.
Okay, so looking at some of the outcomes that we came about, just at a high level, this is kind of the number of individuals and teams that we touched. Somewhere north of 1,000, not as large as some of what David showed earlier, but still fairly significant in scope. About 150 engineering teams spread across about 10 different organizations inside of CapitalOne. So significant in scale, certainly. So overall, these are where we move the needle, I think. If you ask the folks involved, the management and teams felt that there was discernible increase in throughput, just getting more value out the door. Of course, that resulting from shortened time to market, cutting lead times in half, has a great effect on throughput. I think one of the most areas that I'm pleased and proud to have been involved with is increasing the level of sustainability for people. That whole thing about the time boxes and speculative batch commitment, as a consultant in the industry, I see massive problems with overcommitment, and I see people taking times away from their family and their loved ones to be in the office working. And we're all going to die someday, and we should be present in this moment and not waste time. So I think these practices help create sustainability across the company, and that's something I'm very proud of. And then once you start to move the needle in some of these areas, then social capital follows close behind. So the level of trust increase as the system stabilizes, and those are some nice outcomes there. So just inertia is always a big problem. It's kind of what keeps me up at night as a coach and a consultant. Inertia. But in this case, here we're saying that 71% of teams that experimented with the WIP limits, they continued to use them. Sometimes it fell off, and we reverted back, and there can be a host of reasons for that, reorgs and staffing changes and other political factors, but a good percentage of the teams began using WIP limits and continued to use WIP limits far into the future. Roughly 86% reported back positive benefits, both qualitative and quantitative. We have a mix of different results. Qualitative results I find are very easy to accomplish. It's quantitative results. That's where that's the holy grail, right? We want to be able to show empirical data that we're delivering more, and I'll show some examples of that right here. So this is a quick example of two different middleware teams. The graph on the left is showing, so each bar is a release period. It's a PI, okay, because they do safe. So what you see there is the inflection point in between PI 14 and PI 15, and that's where this team went through the training, and then they started visually managing their work and limiting work in progress. That was the inflection point. That was the significant change that occurred at that point in time. So here you see in the following release periods, there's about a 55% increase in story throughput there, and I will say that 55% is a quite modest result. We can see ridiculous numbers in some of these improvements. It's a fairly modest result. The graph on the right is a different team, and the thing with this chart is that last release 13, so the inflection point happens, and then you see the increase in throughput, 54 stories, and then that R13, they had measured 40 stories at that point in time when they took the measurement, and they were only about halfway through their release period at that point in time. So we'd have to extrapolate the rest of that bar, but they were on track to basically double their throughput from the initial release that as a baseline that we measured. So there's a little bit of extrapolation happening there, but they were super jazzed at this time that they were only halfway through the release period, and they had already accomplished more than they did in the whole other baseline release period. So that was pretty cool. So here are a couple of different teams. These are data warehouse teams, and this is this magic thing that you see with Kanban. When you start to limit work in progress and you eliminate or drastically reduce the context switching, you always see this signature. So each one of these is a run chart of lead time for a particular type of work, one type of stuff. You see the inflection point there, like in the prior graph. That's where these teams started visually managing their work and eliminating work in progress. They laid out a better workflow with exit criteria and classes of service and had a very coherent definition of their process, a shared understanding of it. So you can see in the left graph, before the inflection point, we've got lead times that go up north of 55 days, and then after the inflection point, they're down under 35 days. Here we're showing an average lead time reduction of 50%. Again, a fairly modest result, but we'll take it, right? On the chart on the right, similar thing. Here we're seeing a 68% decrease in lead time, and those arrows are an approximate linear regression line fitting through, and you can see that nice, the nice tilt on that. So we're getting faster, more predictable. This is the empirical evidence. It's not anecdotal. It's right there. It's irrefutable. Okay, so now this is interesting. This is a whole swath of teams. This is 12 data warehouse teams. And Bobby Broughton is very familiar with this graph because he probably measured some of these. But so this is 12 different teams, and this is showing throughput, story throughput, okay? So the first three bars are the baseline. The inflection point is right in the middle of the graph. All right, so across 12 different teams, you see a range of different improvements here from 23, I guess, all the way up to 300. Now, the cause of these changes that's a multivariate thing. There's not one thing you can put your finger on that caused those improvements, but again, we'll take them, right? It's a combination of things that these teams did, leveraging though, and the root of it being Kanban principles and practices. So, I mean, this is pretty compelling when you look at it at this large a number of teams in one shot. So, again, something that we're very pleased with these kinds of results. And polling these various teams, when you start talking to them about what they thought contributed to the increase in their own words, this is what they came back with. So visual management, WIP limits, actually understanding lead time and the probability distribution for lead time for different classes of work is huge. Decision policies, exit criteria. A lot of times until we come together and define these things together as a group, everyone has a different understanding of what the process is and what the exit criteria is. There's a lot of tacit knowledge that stays bottled up in our heads. And so that's why the static method is so valuable, because it brings people together and it gets the tacit knowledge out on paper, and then we can start building models from it. And that's really enormous credit goes to the Kanban community and David for codifying the static method. We've customized it at CapitalOne, but it's just invaluable. So boardwalk practice during the stand-up, and then vertical story slicing is really around solving the problem of fragmentation, where you have fragments of value and not units of value. So quite pleased with these results. Okay, so this is perhaps interesting. These are some results, qualitative results. So we have a depth assessment graph, and then we came up with some other qualitative radars here. This one is around social health and cohesion. Now, some of you will gasp at the fact that the scale here is non-ordinal. It's scalar, and the reason for that, and I wouldn't recommend doing this with a risk profile, but the reason that it's non-ordinal on the depth is because I think when you have dimensions with different gradients, like you have one with 3 ticks and one with 10 ticks, when the shape changes over time, it doesn't change the way my brain wants to see it. So that's why we just do surveys and we rate things on a 1 to 10 scale, and we can see the rough movement in the data. So the precision of the numbers is not the important thing, it's how it moves over time. And I found that using scalar values on a 1 to 10 scale and doing surveys helps us see how people are feeling about practice and these other qualitative measures. So I think these were very useful just in terms of capturing how folks are feeling about the change and where we need to put some more improvement effort there. Okay, so another interesting thing that came out of some of the work was we started doing a dependency analysis in the workshops, and we started harvesting common cause delays. So we did these diagrams, and then we did commonality analysis between the diagrams, and we could see what was stopping not just 1 or 2 teams, but across an entire department, right? So blocker clustering is great, but I find doing spectral analysis on the blockers is you can get a much deeper understanding of where all the delay is coming from across a large number of teams. So we harvested those blockers, and we added a bunch of new categories in the tool. When something is blocked, you could give it a category, and then we could do the spectral analysis and see over a big swath of teams what's causing common cause delay, and that drove some kind of senior level improvement that we created a board for, and that drove sort of interdepartment hot house discussions where we solved some really big problems across departments, not just within one department. And harvesting these blockers and doing this kind of spectral analysis proved to be a very valuable tool for us, and we even augmented the tool to be able to get more fine-grained with it. And then something else that emerged was leadership walk the walls, or kind of SLT level gimbal walks, where our leaders would come in the environment and just go around and talk to the teams and visit the teams and see their boards and see their metrics and really breathe and smell and hear and feel the shop floor. So this was really cool when you get senior leaders walking around and talking to the teams and looking at their boards and talking about their issues. This was really refreshing that this practice came about. So that was really cool. And then it's really interesting to see an environment where boards start popping up like flowers, and they just start popping up everywhere. And all of a sudden, what was a sort of a dry office environment becomes this sort of garden of visualization. It's just really cool to see that happen, and that certainly did happen here. All right, so we have a quick video. I've gone through some of the numbers, and here we're going to hear it from the horse's mouth here. A couple of folks from CapitalOne are going to chime in and share some of their experience in the work that we did. How do I play this? Do I just...
The technique for team curiosity. Today I'm going to talk about the Lean Agile framework. Coming out of the training, we set up our Agile board so that we can have a visual presentation of how things are working and how things are moving sprint after sprint. We did identify, the team actually identified the bit that they want to acknowledge every sprint to identify how much work they can complete. Since we were new, so at the point where in the sprints where we tried to follow through the WIP, which is work in progress, we found that we were able to accomplish more work and more stories within a sprint, and they were all completed, not like some pending work left over in the stories and moving forward. We had the problem of BAU earlier. We created an expedite lane for the BAU so that we can follow through the BAU process as an unexpected word, and we can already put it into we can incorporate that into our grid. With this, we were able to really achieve a lot of story completion within the sprint. We also saw that in some of the sprints, since we were new to this process, we broke the rule and we did not follow through the web, and we found that in those sprints, we had again a spillover over which will go to the next sprint. And that's where we saw that if we follow through, continue to improve on this process and follow through and acknowledge it, we will be able to do a better job in getting our work done. Again, going into the training, I was thinking more about it's another process that we will have to work through, but looking at the live experience and through our sprint and seeing the difference in the two sprints that we conducted, the sprints that we conducted before and the sprints that we conduct now, we see a big value in going through this lean agile, and I would definitely encourage everybody to participate in that.
Engineer that by developer on the training. Why don't you tell a little bit about how you kind of thought about Agile before and then?
Yeah, I knew everything about Agile. That was great. Scrum Master absolutely unique, but that's a bit of an overstatement. But really, I just felt like it was stopping me from being a productive executive. At every turn, there's always something silly going on with this process. I know this process actually helps me become a lot better versus this is not part of the process. But it just felt like things were happening outside of the Agile process that Agile was trying to control. So we were trying to you just make a string. Okay, so if we were into these things, we're trying to fill up all the way. Okay, great. Okay, well then we got these 10 things. Okay, let's go to 8% passing. So I don't know, these 20 things. So just trying to predict the future that was unpredictable. I know where everything is in the team. And it also really helps in the other side of this, what I really like is it helps visualize it. And having to be the same perspective instead of well, wait. Before it was, oh, let's just put that in progress, let's put that in progress, who cares, whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't get 10 things in progress, what is going to
Finish up, talk about your previous teams you actually brought them over as well.
Yeah, I don't even recognize myself weird. So yeah, I joined over here in July, so I went back to my old training, and it's like, hey guys, you know how much I got about this well. They came across campus because they could see what I was talking about. And had a couple meetings with them, walking through it all. Got an email Tuesday saying that was their first day in this process, so they're happy with there. It does feel like it helps me versus something that's maybe working on. Whether it's mental or it's crazy, I don't know. It really does make me feel like I'm doing the best job.
So, yeah, I mean, that guy right there, I don't know if you picked up on it initially, but the manager asked him how he felt about Agile. He said, I hated everything about it. And now finally, this helps me feel like I'm doing the best job that I can. I mean, that almost brings a tear to the consultant's eye because that's what it's all about right there, hearts and minds. One thing I want to call out is you didn't hear the word Kanban once in there. And so those of us that have been through the master class, we have a special appreciation, I think, for the psychology of the people that we're working with and avoiding resistance. And we found that one of the ways to do that in this context was to minimize the use of the term Kanban. And we relied more on the notion of lean systems. And so that's how we flowed water around the rock in this case. And I think that was a useful strategy.
So we got a little bit of a late start. I'm going to go sort of quickly through the workshop, but I want to give you all a flavor of what we did with the teams to give them the knowledge and empower them to make these changes. If you have any questions about more specifics, you can see Eric or I after the workshop. So we used the teaching from the back of the room method so that folks could learn by doing, and it helped them understand their specific challenges and opportunities as a team. How many of you guys have played the Kanban Gamer or are familiar with it? most of you. So, of course, it's a great way to get quick experience and hands-on learning for teams on understanding how limiting WIP can increase flow, because that's such a counterintuitive idea when you think about it. And it helps them understand how a pull system works, and especially understanding cost of delay and using the expedite capability. What we saw from this was that teams really understood how decisions on when to pull in work and what work to pull in had outcomes, and they got very competitive with this game and had a lot of fun. As you can see, they had this nice little skeleton that happened to come to the game around Halloween, and they actually used that as a proxy for our friend, the Mina QE person in the game. Carlos. So we played the game with actually with the senior leadership team twice, and it really helped them not only understand what their teams were doing, but it helped them see that leadership at all levels was something that their teams were now equipped to do even better. And they really understood how this could allow some decentralized decision-making, because the teams now had the information they needed to help make those day-to-day decisions. We used an interactive process archaeology, which is a modified static, to create shared context and understanding of the team's environment and opportunities. And this helped them understand how value is created, helped them understand what issues were preventing them from value creation, and it got things out of their head and out in the open where they can talk about and make decisions on them. And this helped them then have a better understanding of risk management and metrics. This was definitely an interesting thing, this dissatisfier exercise. First of all, the teams loved it because they could figure out what was frustrating them and have a conversation around it. But it also was more than just a complaint session. It helped them figure out what things were keeping them from doing their best work and then action on them. We actually used that work to create heat maps, and this is an example that you'll see up here that shows and some of the things that were really bothering teams at a whole and an aggregate. And this helped leadership determine what things we might want to focus on next. And here you'll see demand analysis. I really love this table format. It helped the teams look at all of their work all together, and it helped them not only see what work was hidden, what types of work they were doing, but also understand what types of work they had the capacity to do or they didn't have the capacity to do, and which things were causing them to work late or causing a lot of pain for the team. And then workflow analysis and design. So many of you will recognize this, designing the systems. This really helped the teams have conversations and have that conversation to model the work and spend the time ahead of time on what does it really mean to be ready and done for each part of their process. And they came to realize after the workshop that having the conversation as a group, as they modeled it, then made their day-to-day workflow much more smoothly. Here you'll see a dependency analysis. As you can see, we have a set of teams and how they work together to deliver software. On the bottom, you'll see that we were able to take that and bring a common cause, a common network together on working across a whole department, what was needed to deliver it. And that helps to show complexity and also figure out where some delays might be happening. And Eric talked earlier about the common cause delays, so I'm not going to hit on that a second time. And then this is just an example of the teams really spent time making sure that as they diagrammed their boards and started them out, even the early design, they really put a lot of effort and thought and precision into to make sure that they were getting what they needed out of it.
Okay, so this is kind of some of the things put in practice here, some examples of boards and so forth. It's interesting because a variety of different mutations came out of the work that we did, and there were several different practice patterns that emerged. So here at the bottom, you see an example of a pretty decent Kanban system there. We found that initially, doing some of the proto-Kanban things was very beneficial. Sometimes it was per person WIP limits. We found that a large percentage of the time, the teams opted for a con-whip sandwich, or sort of a con-whip system inside in the middle of the board, so you have a regional WIP limit over a set of states. When you have specialties or folks that float across those different columns, oftentimes defining a con-whip limit there can be the easiest path forward. So we did things like try to prevent, in studying the objects flowing through the system, a lot of times we discovered that they were fragments or they were dependent tasks and not really units of value. So we tried to coalesce those and coach to have units of value flowing across, and that you get some improvement just from doing that alone. We got, I think, put a big focus on blockers, measuring blockers, the type of blockers, and doing analysis on that to really understand where all the time is going. It's interesting because if all we're doing is looking at impediments and blocking something when we think there's a problem, you're missing out on a huge amount of data there. Anytime something is stopped on a board, you want to understand why it's stopped and understand the effect on flow efficiency. And a lot of times we don't take that step. So we got, I think, pretty crisp on measuring and understanding blockers and being able to reflect on that. And then classifying the work, defining the taxonomy of work, defining your cost of delay taxonomy, and being able to tag things, I think was very useful in being able to coalesce data sets for analysis, and also being able to see the risk on the board very quickly. You should be able to glance at the board and see the distribution of risk in 1 to 2 seconds. And so that was some of what we did there. Here's a blow-up of that particular board. This is a pretty garden variety example here. There's some upstream options development happening. There's our commitment point number 1 with our 4 bread and butter classes of service here: expedite, fixed date, standard, intangible, with some limits, capacity allocation on those guys. Here you have this regional WIP limit here across this whole area. You have 6 engineers working in this section of the board. They can float freely in those different areas. And then you have your downstream release management. So here's your second phase commitment, the deployment queue, where we batch things that we may do a batch transfer of things with independent replenish and deployment cadences for that. And then we have our exit criteria down below so that we make that explicit so that things don't slip through the cracks. Okay, we're out of time. That's the first one I saw. Okay, well, let me steal a couple of minutes here. Let's see. A couple more examples. Again, these things started popping up everywhere, and it's great to see that when that happens. The great thing about this, it's low tech, but this beats the hell out of most software you can get. So, where you can, you really want to do this. See, these are some program level boards. It's a safe board over there. That's very similar to the Corbis example that David teaches from, 2-tiered sort of epic story. Once the stories make their way across the epic, it jumps over and is done. Program level board. No limits on these boards, just visual radiators at the program level. They were a big help. All right, 2 more slides.
All right, so I'm going to try to get to this quickly so you all have time to ask a few questions. So first of all, of course, we wanted to make sure we evolved our approach over time. So one of the things we did was we made sure that we looked at the dependency networks that we showed earlier and understood how those delays, how those blockers needed to be created in our tools so that we could analyze them more easily. Secondly, we made sure that we called out every time we saw some great creativity in some of the boards. We had like Pac-Man boards. We had all kinds of like really interesting creative ways teams like to look at their work and show their work. And then thirdly, we started looking at something called improvement kata. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it was a great model for us to teach teams on how to evolve experimentally and make sure that they measured their improvement and made decisions as they went. And finally, our learning. So again, evolutionary change, I can't say it enough. we really made sure that we made small changes. And like David said, if you make small changes, you can roll them back if they're not working. You just have to look at what's working and what's not and make those decisions as you go. One of the other things we did was we made sure that the internal coaches, such as myself, collaborated closely with Eric, because we have more organizational context, of course. We work with the teams more closely. We've been at CapitalOne for a while, and this helped us have a distributed coaching model. Thirdly, the teams were really excited to do this. They were so happy to take that talent that they have for problem solving and turn that inward to make their own team better. And then we provided teams with post-workshop follow-up so that the teams could ask us questions and that we could make sure that we were helping them take that investment that they made in the 2-day workshop and really put it in action. And then finally, we made sure that we did NPS scores after every workshop so that we can make sure that we were making valuable use of everyone's time and that we were improving the workshop from the feedback we got. And finally, we want to make a quick call out. Thank you, Marie Dingus. Marie's the one that brought us together. And she did an awesome job of making sure that all of this had such a huge impact on the digital engineering group. So how much time do we have for questions? We have 5 minutes. If you have a question, please raise your hand and they'll bring the microphone to you.
Hi, thank you. Could you expand, sorry, can you hear me? Can you expand very quickly on the archaeology process that you mentioned regarding risk profiling or risk management, better said?
So it really is just a modification of static. And so that's one of the metaphors that we used in the workshop, is that we're going to be uncovering a lot of the details about how you work today, how you manage risk, how you make decisions. A lot of it is tacit. And so we want to get that out and put it down on paper so that we can study it and derive models from it. So it's really just a metaphor of we're uncovering what's already in your head so that we can make it explicit and study it. So that's the archaeology metaphor there. It's just sort of a play on static. I think you can apply the metaphor to what we do there. Over here.
What tools were you using to gather all of the data and to interpret it?
So when we started, we were mostly using a toolkit that Eric created in Excel. And we evolved actually, I guess, only in the last month where we were able to get some adjustments made to JIRA and start actually using JIRA to mine some of the data. So it was a combination of the tools that we use day to day and this toolkit that Eric created.
You mentioned about 1,000 people. What's the journey look like ahead of you? I mean, is it continuing? What sort of a impact is it to the overall enterprise?
So I'll take that one. So we, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, there was a group that Eric worked with before he started working with Marie and I in digital. So the first group he worked with has taken what they learned from Eric, and they are continuing to use it in working with their internal customers. I've actually spent some time coaching them to go back and how they can do things like look at their blockers to figure out the interaction that they have across their workflow that's going to dependent teams. The second group, the digital engineering group, continues to expand on what they've learned, and they continue to have more and more teams that want to take this workshop. So that's one of the things that we're actually challenged with. We have more demand than we have capacity right now to do the workshop. And then we have other groups who are starting to look at this. We're trying to make sure that, as we did with digital, we go in and look at what problems are they trying to solve, and we don't just say, all right, everybody, flip the switch, we're changing over to Kanban. Because one of the things that Eric taught us and emphasized a lot was there's no switching to Kanban. You really take a look at what you're doing now, and then you look at what changes you need to make, and you make small changes. It looks like we're out of time. So like I said, Eric and I will be available. We'll be here for the next couple days. So if you have questions, please feel free to find us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.